Hey everybody, Ryan here from Music City Live. Welcome to the podcast. I'm here with DJ Williams. DJ Williams from Jet Set Event Management. He's an event producer, marketer, and everything radio and events. DJ, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. This has been a good one. This is gonna be a good one for me.
I hope so. I mean, this is exciting. This is the first time I've ever done a podcast.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I'm the first podcast. That's awesome. Well, this is so we met. Where did we meet?
I actually think, in looking back, that we may have officially met at one of your client events at Porsche of London.
That's right. Yeah. And essay, we got a photo of that, right?
That was literally the night before COVID went crazy and things started shutting down.
I know. I remember that.
In fact, I know people that I think got COVID that night.
Really, eh?
I never had it.
No.
Which at least I don't think I did.
Yeah.
And but I had just come home the night before from Florida, and I remember being at a airport in West Palm Beach, and I started seeing all these masks.
Yeah.
And we were looking at them like, what's going on? Why are people wearing masks like this? And I'll never forget, that was the next day I came home and we went to that event and I met you.
Yeah, that I remember that event. That was a great event. And that was actually one of the last Porsche events. In fact, it was the last Porsche event in that building because they moved dealerships.
That's right.
Right. And that was a great event. Yeah, I remember that. I pulled that photo up because I was like, yeah, that's right.
That's funny.
Yeah, man. So talk to me about sort of early days for you. I know you came from a radio family. That's kind of how I'm assuming, of course, that's how you got into it. But, how did that all start for you?
Well, I was born in 1969, and my parents had both worked at CFPL Radio here in London, which happened to be in the Free Press building at the time. And my mom was a music librarian, and my dad was a top 40 disc jockey. And the funny history behind that is that my dad was the first disc jockey in North America to play the Beatles.
Really?
Yeah, my mom, who had the actual record that she gave to him, they had copies of the Beatles music in 1963. And my dad was playing it on the radio back then, and I've actually heard the recorded sound checks, so it's legit. It's not a made-up story, because there's a big battle, especially in the United States, of who the first disc jockey was to play the Beatles, and to know that my dad was playing them long before that has been really exciting. But I actually have had some recent pictures of my mom working at the CFPL music library and my dad on the air back in the Free Press building, and it's been actually very interesting to see that building be torn down recently.
I was just going to say that.
I drive by and it's crushing, because that was actually my first job in radio as well.
Oh, really?
Back in 1997, I started working there. But, even before then, I was familiar with the building. I literally grew up in there because, on the weekends when my dad was doing shifts on the radio, I would come up, when basically the station was closed, and I'd have full reign of the radio stations,
That's cool.
Go into the studios and play with the knobs and talk into the microphone. And my dad would have me on the radio sometimes. And so I definitely had a head start than most people that get into the radio business these days.
Yeah, I drove by the building the other day, and they just started tearing it down, and I was like, wow, this is really happening. And then a few days later, I drove by again, and there's like two small, like yesterday or something, and there's like two small little pieces left. And I get it. Like I've lived in London my whole life, and that building's been standing my whole life. And I remember when they tore down the CN building downtown, and that was a big deal. And to me, this is a big deal too.
It's a big deal, and it's very symbolic of a lot of things too.
Yeah, absolutely.
To me, it's the whole industry as well. And just a part of London's heritage. It's actually it's bothered me quite a bit, because it's just been sad to see that you had 4 amazing radio stations in there. You had the newspaper, but you had a family there. and a lot of people, I mean, there's a lot of, social media pages that celebrate the history of the Free Press building. And, the Blackburn family did such a great job of being there for the employees and giving them hope and opportunities. And so every time I drive by, I almost get a little bit of a tear because it was a part of my life growing up as well.
I met Richard Blackburn years ago. He was working with my dad on some stuff, and yeah, great guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I hear that his mom was fantastic too. I never had a chance to meet her, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I grew up listening to FM 96 and all these stations that were based out of there, and it just seems so weird to think that, as you were mentioning earlier, that things have changed. And even before we started the pod, you were mentioning, things have changed a lot, and that, I've seen it. I've heard not only from you, but a lot of people that radio has really changed, and there's a lot of syndication and there's a lot of cost cutting and things like that. But, but we've seen that in print too, right? You mentioned London Free Press that was in that building, and, I don't even know where they print that now. Like it's like, I don't even know. I haven't talked to really a lot of people in print, but like I got to think that it's more virtual now, right? It's more digital.
It is. I mean, their online version of it is I think doing pretty well, and it still is as local as it can be. But they're experiencing the same things that the radio stations are across the country, the TV stations as well. It's just everything's being scaled back, and a lot of these companies are now being run by accountants, not by creative people.
Ugh.
And to see the way that a lot of these veteran broadcasters in any medium are being let go or downsized or laid off, it's painful to watch. I struggle with it every day because the resources and teams that I used to have access to were some of the greatest minds I've ever worked with. And I still work in radio. I work for Chorus. My full-time job is working for FM 96 and Fresh FM, Country 104 and 980 CFPL. And we still have great brands. We still have great teams, although a little, smaller than they used to be. But radio still works locally. It really is the pulse of the community. And, I work very closely with Taz and Jim on the morning show. And,
great guys.
And they're fantastic guys
Yeah,
that
they are.
go in and they work different hours than we all do, but they give it their all every day. And the advertisers that I work with, they love our stations. They deliver results. Like, radio still is very viable. It's just that to bigger companies that are into digital and television networks and specialty channels and all of that local radio is definitely paying the price for it.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, there was a big layoff too, right? With Bell. Bell this year had a massive layoff.
And our companies had to do it too, and our other competitors.
Yeah.
It's the reality's the same for all of us.
Yeah, right. So going back to the early days for you, you said your mom was a music librarian?
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
Well, I mean, back in the day, now you see in the radio stations that everything's digital and on hard drives and all of that, is that, the music librarians like my mom would actually pull a record off the shelf and stack them up and take them into the studio, and guys like my dad would be spinning the records, queuing them up. There was just that energy. I mean, you may see things like on WKRP in Cincinnati with Johnny Fever or whatever in the studios, but I mean, the disc jockeys of those days were rock and roll stars. I mean, they were the bridge between the bands and the fans, and to grow up watching my dad be a number one disc jockey in the local community, introducing the biggest songs of the day to the general public. It always amazed me, and I learned a lot. My father had passed away recently, and the tributes a lot of people in London, like Bill Brady or Peter Garland, or Steve Garrison, those types of guys, when they talked about my dad, he was as much of a star as the bands themselves.
Wow.
And when my dad would go introduce a band at the London Gardens or somewhere like that, people wanted my dad's autograph too.
We got some photos, right, Essay, of your dad? I picked just a few that I found there online.
Yeah. No, they're fantastic, and that was a big part. And also going back to the days of the London Free Press, it was a great combination of print and radio, where they always had photographers available to document everything that the radio station was doing,
right,
because that was their brand as well. So the cross promotion was fantastic.
Where was this photo taken?
My dad actually is a pioneer in the voiceover from home business.
Oh, yeah?
I remember giving my dad one of my computers many years ago, and he learned, taught himself how to record commercials from his home studio.
That's cool.
And the picture that you're looking at there was actually my dad in Key West, Florida,
Awesome.
where he had his own studio down there right up until the time that he passed. I mean,
Wow.
he literally was voicing commercials the same week that he passed away. It was it was amazing that he was radio through and through.
Yeah, 6 decades I read.
It sure was, and he as a teenager, that's all he did. But my dad understood marketing really well.
Yeah,
he understood that it was showbiz. And he understood how to be out there in the community as well. My dad was actually a very, believe it or not, very, I think, I hate to use the word insecure, but a little bit. Like, I think my dad did like being behind the mic in a studio by himself, performing his craft.
Yeah.
Because as much as he could get up and light up a room wherever he went, I think that was always something that he really had to work hard at,
Sure.
but didn't ever show it.
Yeah, I get that. There was someone said something to me at one point where it's like, yeah, you got a face for radio.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Well, fortunately, my mom was a beautiful woman. So
Well, there you go.
my dad and I always joked about that. So.
Well, your dad was the rock star of her time, though, because if they met there and she was the librarian, he was the rock star.
Yeah.
She was getting him all those records.
Well, and it was kind of funny because at the time, my great-grandfather was the mayor of London twice.
Really?
Yeah, his name was Ray Dennis, and he served as the mayor of London twice. And so, back in the day, that meant quite a bit. And my grandfather was a successful businessman as well. And it was kind of like, in this day and age, they were like local royalty almost. And
Wow.
and so it was always kind of funny growing up.
And that was your mom's dad?
My mom's dad was my grandfather. Actually was one of the inventors of the butter patty, if you can believe it, where you
Really?
actually those ones where you peel off the wax off the top.
Yeah.
And owned a creamery here in London on King Street between Talbot and Rideout, actually. Okay. And it was my great grandfather's creamery that my grandfather wound up running. But so it was there was a lot of history in downtown London for my family.
Absolutely. Yeah, like it's as you know, I'm in a family business too, and it tends to go that way. Like when I was young, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I think I wanted to be an astronaut or something, a lawyer. But I found the music industry, through my dad, and as you did, and it sucked me right in, man. It was just so cool.
Yeah.
So I guess you were sort of mentioning kind of running around, in the Free Press building when your dad was playing there. At what point did you yourself sort of get involved with music stuff?
Well, I mean, apart from, loving going into the music library and taking it into some of the studios at the radio station and getting to play all these records of any band that I wanted because they had everything there,
Sure.
I started finding my inspiration from live music. I mean, with going to shows with my dad. I grew up really a big fan of Canadian rock and roll.
Okay.
That's really been my niche even to this day.
What were some of the bands that really got you at the time?
Well, probably bands that your family were involved with putting on shows at, Victoria Park or London Gardens or whatever. I remember seeing bands like Street Heart and Gatto and Haywire and April Wine, of course, who I'm sure we'll discuss shortly.
Yeah.
And my favorite band, I think, of all time was Rush.
Oh, wow.
And so, I spent my years growing up in my basement at home with doing a lot of air guitar. I don't really know how to play more than 3 or 4 notes on a guitar. I'm a fairly accomplished air drummer, I think. And,
Nice.
And my voice sure sounds pretty good when I'm singing to music, but when I'm in front of a mic on my own, it's not really a good thing. But,
Well, that's why you're out there promoting all those bands. Right?
Yeah, and so what wound up happening was when I was 13 years old, I went to a school in St. Catharines.
Okay.
And while I was at that school, I wound up being classmates and kind of roommates with Rain Maida from Our Lady Peace and Duncan Coots, who's also in Our Lady Peace. And kind of they started jamming a little bit and put together their own, bands and stuff like that. And that's when I really started falling in love with music and learning about bands that they liked and all of that. Because I didn't know anybody when I went to St. Catharines. And when I got there, those were some of the first guys I met and really bonded with, and still to this day spend a lot of time with and talking to them every once in a while.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I had SA set up. So normally we don't have an amp in the middle, but I had him set this up because I knew this would probably come up, and I bought that head was actually Mike Turner's.
Okay.
Mike's studio. He had a studio on Queen Street.
Yep.
And the owner of the building decided to sell the building at one point, and he was forced to obviously bring all his gear home. And his wife, I asked him, I said, "Why are you selling the gear?" And he's like, "My wife said if I don't get some of this stuff out of the basement, it's going to be a problem."
I can hear it coming out of Karen's mouth now.
Totally.
I know them both very well,
Yeah.
and keep in touch with Mike too. And once again, he was another guy that introduced me to a lot of British rock music. I spent a lot of time on the road with Our Lady Peace and learned a lot about music from Mike Turner.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mike's great. I mean, we've kept in touch a little bit too, and not nearly as much as I would like. I don't get down to Toronto as much as I used to. Years ago, I was there all the time. Mm-hmm. But lately, with building the business and just everything, I haven't been there as much. But I am planning on visiting there a lot more in the next little while, so I'll probably reach out to him. Mm-hmm. But yeah, shouts out to Mike Turner for sure, because that was a great thing. I was at the Toronto airport, and I got a call from someone that said, "Yeah, Mike's looking to sell some gear." And I got a hold of him, and he's like, "Yeah, man, I'm home. Come on down." Mm-hmm. And I hadn't seen him since the Our Lady Peace days, back when in the 90s, when I was doing shows with them and I was doing lighting and stuff. And and it was cool to just go and hang and see what he had. And he had a bunch of stuff that I would have loved to have taken off his hands. But I mean, at that time, there was only so much that I could do. But anyway. We've got a few pieces like that. I got that pedal, the wah pedal there is from Jeff Healy too.
Oh, wow.
From Bungie. That was his main, Healy one, his main wah pedal. But we got Bungie here, right, who was Healy's tech. And so fortunately, Bungie was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna let some of this stuff go." And I've sort of created a bit of a museum here for some of this stuff because of the, I just like, that's what I told you earlier. I like creating community. I like keep connecting things together. That amp head behind you actually was John Angus's from the Trues.
Okay.
He I bought that from him, and he had been gifted it from Gordy Johnson from Big Sugar.
Yep.
So yeah, we're the Schroeyens family here, we've always been about, family and community. And I'm always trying to put this all together. That's why I got you on. And that's why, I'm getting this pod going. Because, I think it's important for us to showcase the Canadian industry, the Canadian community of not just the artists, but the whole industry. Because we've got some incredible people.
For sure.
Right? So Rain Maida and the guys, you went to school with them in St. Catharines, and then what happened?
Then I went off to Montreal. I went to McGill University, and I took public relations management there. And part of my last course that I took before I graduated was a public relations management course. And one of the things that they had me do was and it was an amazing experiment that I've never seen done before, was they said, we want you to create your own resume and your own cover letter, and we want you to apply for 10 jobs locally in Montreal that you would like to go work with. And because I wasn't a musician, but I wanted to be in the music business, I reached out to Don Jones here in London, who obviously the Jones family, Jones Entertainment Group with Brad and Greg. And Don hooked me up with a gentleman named Donald K. Donald in Montreal, who is one of the biggest concert promoters in North American history. Yeah. And I applied for an internship there, and I got it.
Wow.
It was pretty amazing. And one of the gentlemen I'll explain in a minute who worked for Donald, Barry Garber, brought me under his wing. And literally the first day of my job, I was like, so what am I going to do? And they said, well, first of all, you're having dinner with Phil Collins tonight.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, wow, okay. And it was Genesis was playing at the Big O in Montreal, and
wow.
Donald was producing the show. And so I got to experience, like, thrown right into the water. And I was just kind of a runner, learning everything. And they had, I remember, a big sort of table set up, kind of a buffet thing where the band and the crew would eat together. And I'll just never forget sitting right by that table, and all of a sudden in come the limos, and the band comes out. And they were there just like they were part of a family, part of a thing, which is another thing I've learned about this industry that there's a lot more of, is that behind the scenes now in this whole 360 world, whether it be the concert promoters and the touring aspect, the merchandise, everything is all kind of one thing now. And a lot of it started in Montreal with Donald. He kind of created a culture of agents, managers, promoters, ticket sales, merchandise, everything all in one. And so, it was amazing to work with Donald and see a variety of these bands come through, because, I wound up getting to do stuff with, U2, and I was there working at the Guns N' Roses riot in 1992.
Oh, wow.
That was actually one of my first shows there as well. And backstage, right there with Axl and Duff and Metallica was on the same show when James Hetfield got burned that day. Faith No More was opening the show as well, and I was riding around on bikes with them and everything. I was so lucky to get a chance to see the music business like that.
Yeah.
But what it came down to me in those situations was it all came back to the upstart Canadian bands. That's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to make my mark, and before Our Lady Peace had a contract with a record label, Rain and I went to New York City, and we went to the CMJ music conference back then, and we were literally walking around with demo tapes, like, in our pockets, going awesome. Around all the A&R guys trying to do it. And we actually broke through and got some interest back then. And I remember being in New York with Rain, and Rain said, I got to take you to see this other Canadian band that I think you should really take an interest in. And I was like, sure, who are they? And he said, they're called the Tea Party. And he said, you won't believe it. There's this guy in the band that's like a guitar player, but he uses like a violin thing, and they're playing at this thing. So let's go check him out. And I'll never forget just going and seeing them and going up to the band afterwards. And at the time they were working with a manager and a kind of an agent helping them out. And what I started doing with those two bands was I started doing shows with them in Montreal, and I'm talking shows with 50, 100, 200 people. That's it.
Sure.
But I set up a syndicate all through Quebec and the Maritimes where a lot of Ontario bands never had a chance to make it out there, or even bands from the West Coast. And so what we would do is we'd start the tour. They'd drive up, maybe do a show in Kingston or something, and then they'd come to Montreal. And more often than not, these guys were sleeping on my floor in Montreal. And we would do these small gigs in these small clubs. But then the next night we'd be in different cities, like through Quebec, like Drummondville, Sherbrooke, Trois-Rivières, and then we'd make our way into New Brunswick and do a couple shows there, and then into Nova Scotia, and we'd go on the road and have these like amazing experiences where we were all cutting our teeth together, just like I said with my dad and the bands, I was always okay with being the guy in the back and just making sure everything was looked after. And it just kind of went from there. And all of a sudden, some of the West Coast bands started catching on, and I'm doing shows with 5440 and it just, it blossomed into that. And, I lost some money on some shows too. I had some shows that didn't work out well. And, but while I was doing it, I started learning about writing radio commercials to promote the shows that these bands were on.
Of course, right.
And then full circle back to the radio business.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty cool. When would all that syndicate show stuff, was that like early to mid 90s?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Yeah,
really concentrated between, I'd say, 1992 and 1995, because then I moved back to London in the mid-90s, and that's when I started working in the advertising department at FM 96.
And how did that happen? I mean, obviously your dad was still doing radio at the time, and then I'm assuming that was sort of the connection, right? That brought you in there.
It was a little bit, but my dad wasn't working for the stations then. He'd moved on. He was doing a show down the street with our competitor at the time.
Okay, yeah.
And I knew a sales manager at FM 96, which at the time was a Blackburn station, but then it was purchased by Chorus, who is still my employer.
Yep.
And I came back and I started as a green salesperson there, and worked there for a few years, and then had a couple little stops along the way, but I eventually wound up really getting interested in coming up with radio commercials. And my dad and I sort of started all of this together, and I wound up getting an amazing opportunity down in the United States to go work for a company called Clear Channel, which is now called iHeart. That's what most people know it as.
Yeah.
And
I didn't realize Clear Channel became iHeart.
It did. Yeah, it was called J-Core before Clear Channel, and it was a company run out of Texas by the Mays family, and they had over 1,200 radio stations.
That's insane.
And they came to me and they said, hey, look, we're starting an agency in Atlanta called Creative Services Group, or CSG. And they said, we'd love to have you come in because we are a bunch of creative people. You're technically a sales guy dressed up as a creative person. And we need to find somebody that can talk creative to salespeople. And so they had 5,000 salespeople working for the company.
Wow.
And so these salespeople would come to me in Atlanta. They'd reach out through email or phone and say, hey, I've got a car dealership in Los Angeles, and these guys are spending $1 million with us a year, but we need a real hook to, make it bigger and better. And, the next thing, you've got Snoop Dogg voicing an ad. We had so much access to talent in every city. We had the funds to do it. And it was just an amazing experience to be doing radio commercials in Miami, Seattle, New York City, LA. And I'm just a kid from London, Ontario, kind of playing a supporting role on the team. And then it just wound up opening more and more opportunities for me.
Did you travel to some of those cities when that was all going on?
I mean, it blows me away today being in Times Square in New York at Clear Channel, #1 radio station, Z100, and working, doing stuff with their news talk stations, or even competing ones at 1010 Wins or whatever, where once again, this small town kid from London, Ontario is in New York doing presentations to salespeople that are 10 times better than me, but I was showing them how to use radio commercials to go out and prospect new business.
Sure.
And make themselves way more money. And so it was just an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I was just in New York back in December. I've only been there a few times before, and was in Times Square as well. And just, you can feel it, man. The vibe there is wild.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I went there for the last Kiss show ever.
Right.
And that was crazy on its own. But yeah, man, you can feel it there. You can feel the entertainment vibe is real.
Oh, it's amazing.
There is a lot going on there for sure. I went to go see some comedy while I was there, and I mean, I've gone to see comedy before, but again, comedy in New York is a whole other thing.
Right.
Right. And I got to experience that for the first time. And that was really, really cool. And I got to do it with some friends of mine from here in Canada, that one of which came with me, some of which were down there just unexpectedly.
Right.
So that was fun. But yeah, New York's a pretty fun town to go and hang out and check that kind of stuff out. I tried to get into Saturday Night Live, but didn't realize it was a lottery. Mm-hmm. I didn't know anything about it, but I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that's really cool. How do you think they're doing now? Like 5,000 salespeople.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's definitely not 5,000 salespeople now. It's really been trimmed back like it has been here. They also wound up selling off a lot of their radio stations, and which is
iHeart's still a thing, yeah.
Oh, well, iHeart's still a real thing.
Yeah,
I mean, and when you talk about streaming services and iHeartRadio, which really in the U.S. is started out as kind of a streaming application, where they were even hosting radio stations on there that were their competitors.
Oh, really?
It just was a great platform for access to different brands and executions of contesting and all of that. But it was definitely iHeart was a great experience, but it had similar issues, kind of like they have in Canada with, when you have so many stations like that and you try and spread resources across all of them, it doesn't always work.
Right.
So
yeah, I could see that.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, you came back to Canada, right?
I came back to Canada for a cup of coffee and was invited back to the United States by another company out in Denver, Colorado.
Okay.
And I went to work for a couple stations, which were it was kind of a unique situation for me, because they were sort of hip hop and old school R&B radio stations.
Oh, really?
And they were independently owned by a bank that owned the stations through a bankruptcy. And that it was a really unique situation. And you want to talk about the Wild West, some of the stuff I saw there. I did really well there in sales, and really enjoyed our life out there. And I was approached by a competitor of iHeart at the time called Entercom, which is now called Odyssey. And I became the general sales manager of creative operations, and worked with a couple of their AM stations that were the flagship stations for the Colorado Avalanche and the Denver Nuggets.
Okay.
And so I managed a team out there, and that was a whole new thing for me because I'm a big hockey fan, and not any bigger than my wife, who's a major Colorado Avalanche fan.
Oh, wow.
And we had a great run out there, and but we moved back home to London in 2017, and instantly I went back to chorus again, and they allowed me to come back, and that's I'm still employed.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, I mean, that's a crazy, history already in what you've done, and back and forth and all through the US and all the different stations and radio, and you're still in it.
I'm in it, but just like our industry, I've gone into a few other things as well, and
that's right,
diversified what I've done. And during COVID, something really sparked me to get back into the musical performance area again. I was during COVID when I'd been doing a lot of fundraisers in London, and I remember looking on social media one day and saw during COVID that the Spoons were offering to do fundraising concerts because there could only be 100 people at a time at a concert.
Sure.
That they were offering to do concerts if you did a fundraising aspect for Ronald McDonald House.
Oh, wow.
And so I talked to a couple friends of mine here in London about doing a fundraising show out at Fire Rock in kind of Kamoka area. Yeah. And we hired your company to do the production for us. And it was an amazing situation where we put on a kind of high-end dinner and show performance for 100 people. And the Spoons came and played, and we did a little silent auction that night, and we raised $120,000.
Wow.
With 100 people. It was crazy.
That is crazy.
And that just took it to a whole other level for me. And I started thinking that it was time to kind of start doing more events like that. And so then we sat down with your team again the following summer, and we decided to bring in a tribute show for 2 nights. And this time COVID was at a stage where you could have basically unlimited people at that point.
Sure.
And we brought in a couple tribute artists, a U2 one and a Tragically Hip one. And I think we had just, shy of a couple thousand people over the course of the 2 days for a pop-up startup concert. And, it just like I was hooked then to get back into this world and started doing shows. And then, once again, I came back to your team and said, I have a kind of a cool idea about something out at East Park, and I think a mutual friend of ours, Miles Goodwin, was doing sort of a storytelling acoustic performance of some of the greatest hits. Yeah, there's Miles, and as you obviously can tell through the historical time that of his last few shows, that I'm not sure if our show was the last show he did in Ontario, but there was maybe one more. And
wow. As I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was he. I think it's fair to share the story that he's documented it in his books and stuff, that he had a really bad case of diabetes.
Right.
And I could tell the minute that I hooked up with him here in London that he wasn't doing very well. His blood sugar was crashing very regularly. And I literally, for the time that he was in London for a couple of days there, had to walk around with a bag filled with ice cold orange juice. And
Wow.
I had to keep my eye on him, and it happened a couple times where he started crashing. Even during his performance, he had to kind of say, "Hey DJ, can you bring over one of those orange juices for me?" And I could tell, and
Wow.
it was, thinking about songs like Rock and Roll is a Vicious Game and, all of that stuff was that, he worked his body pretty hard all those years.
Absolutely.
But he was an entertainer, and I idolized him. I spent years like listening to his music and wanting to be Miles Goodwin and to be a part of his, probably one of his final shows, is something I'll never forget.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember when you did that show at East Park. I wasn't Boris, who works here. He lives like across the street, and Boris and Gord are both good friends with Miles. And I remember Gordy telling me he was going. They're like, you should come, man. You should come. And for some reason I was tied up. I couldn't make it. And now I wish I would have went. But Miles and April Wine has touched an incredible amount of people. I think if anybody who's watching goes back and watches all the episodes that we've done so far, we've talked about him in almost, I would say, more than half the episodes.
For sure.
Because, I just had, the last episode we just did was Bill Durst from Thundermug, and Bill opened up for April Wine, and we talked about that. Gord Pryor, who I just mentioned, Gord worked with Miles as well on some stuff, and so there's been a bunch of people that he's touched over the years, and I've worked with him. I mean, you talk about Canadian rock acts. Mm-hmm. I mean, back in the 90s, that's all it was for me. I mean, my dad's company, we were smaller and regional, and we were getting offers to do all the sound and lighting for these smaller shows, and we were doing shows in Chatham and Lucan and London, obviously, but Sarnia and places like Campbell Street Station and all these places that we used to do sound for, Kipling's in London, and April Wine would play these outdoor festivals and these gigs in some small community arenas, right? And I would go set up these shows, as a kid. And I was a kid. I mm-hmm. literally was a young teenager. I don't even know if I think I was like 13, 14, 15 years old. And I'm going out in a 5-ton truck with, a sound guy. And I was doing lights at the time. And I'd go and set these shows up and do lights for April Wine. And I was born in the 80s. I didn't necessarily know who April Wine was, but got to know it real fast and
mm-hmm.
fell in love with all the music. And got to know every single drum roll, every single thing that happened, because that's just who I was when I did lights for bands, and it was an absolute pleasure to work with them every single time. They were a class act, and although Miles, before they switched over to in-ears, I mentioned this in a couple other episodes. I'll never forget, because they were the band that had the biggest monitor rig. Mm-hmm. Their monitor requirements were like no one else.
Yeah.
I mean, we worked with Lenny Kravitz at the time. We'd work with some huge acts, Theory of a Dead Man, all these, the Dixie Chicks. April Wine was the biggest monitor rig.
They were loud.
Yeah, it was wild. Yeah.
Well, it's funny that when you mention even Gordy, I'm good friends with Gord as well. Cool. And it was funny because backstage with Miles here in London, that was the only person that Miles was willing to see and talk to.
Really?
I had to kind of keep a lot of fans away for that, and Gordy was really the only person that Miles welcomed backstage.
Wow.
And I thought that was kind of nice, and going back full circle, that Donald Tarleton from Donald K. Donald that I was speaking of earlier, Donald was the guy who discovered April Wine.
Oh, really?
So
I didn't know that.
A lot of people don't know, but April Wine was from Halifax, and with the Henman boys and all that, and they moved to Montreal. And they moved to Montreal with no plan, no record deal, anything. And Donald, my former boss, was the one who signed them because he owned Aquarius Records. And so he was their record label, he was their manager, he was their agent, he did their merchandise, all of that stuff. And while I was working for Donald, they wound up, April Wine, they were taking a bit of a hiatus. And around that time, April Wine came to London and did a show at the Victoria Park Bandshell that they had 5,000 people at the Victoria Park. And it was kind of the start of the resurgence of the band getting back to what they are now. And I haven't seen them with the new singer yet, but I hear that it is amazing.
Wow. I haven't seen them with the new singer either.
Yeah.
I think we did that. I have to ask my dad, but I think we might have done that show back at the Bandshell. Because we did a lot of those shows back then. FM96 put on a lot of shows at the Bandshell back in those days. And I remember doing a bunch of those back then. And those were good times, man.
Yeah, for sure.
London really came out. And that's something that I meant to bring up earlier when we were talking about your dad, because your dad did shows too, right? I read that your dad did shows at the old Wonderland Gardens and the old London Arena and a few other places, which is really interesting. Like, I remember, because for anyone who's in town now that thinks of Wonderland Gardens, it's not the same. There used to be another building there that was that's gone now. But I did some bands there in the 90s, early 90s with my dad. When I first got a start here, we did a band from Barbados called Spice and Company, who's actually doing a show coming up on May 4th in Barbados, and I'm thinking about getting on a plane and going down. But the Spice, and we did a few shows with Spice when they would come up here, because their lighting guy, Jimmy Campbell, shout out to Jimmy, who still lives in Toronto to this day. He did all their artwork and was really involved with the band. Andy Rabakis, who ended up, after working with them in Canada, moved to Barbados and lived in Barbados for years. He's actually now back in Toronto, working as a sound guy up here, I think, as far as I know, unless he's moved back down. But I wouldn't blame him. But yeah, and we did Dan Hill.
Of course,
at Wonderland Gardens, which was my first, as a young guy, was my first exposure to Dan Hill. And then years later, doing the research on him, going, wow, what a talent!
Wow, yeah,
unbelievable. And so having to got to do lights for him and work with him back then was really cool. But yeah, we did a bunch of shows there, and so it was an absolute pleasure to have done work there. And so yeah, I mean, I read that about your dad, and as I was reading, I thought, you know what, I should listen to see if I can find something from then. And there's a guy who posted a couple months ago some old episodes of your dad's shows. Yeah. And I listened to one today on the way in. Right. And it blew me away, because it's interesting you say your dad was about marketing, because I just had Bill Durst on, and we talked about back then, he talked about the 60s, and obviously I wasn't around then, clearly, but he said, it was different. It was a different time. And he went on to explain that back then, you could decide to do a party or a concert. His example was you could do a concert in Harris Park, and he did one where they went out and flyered, the day before, and 2,000 people showed up. Now, here's the interesting thing. When I was listening to your dad's episode this morning, I could feel it. I could feel how exciting a time it was at that time, because you could hear it in the production, the way that they put the show together. Your dad would talk, but then an ad would come on. But some ads were, you could tell were done with canned singers, but some were just talking. But all of it was done extremely classy. But it was fun. Like it was really, and everything flowed into everything, and then you'd end up in a song, and the songs were all fun and exciting, and I thought to myself when I got here, and I didn't want to turn it off actually. I was like, wow, this is really good, and trying to transport myself back to then, but between having done the episode with Bill and now listening to your dad's 1965, if I remember correctly, was the year that I was listening to. January 7th, 1965. It was on YouTube. And I was blown away. And I realized from listening to that at that time, certainly, and certainly some years to follow, people in the world, specifically obviously in Canada at that time, because that's what we're speaking about, got excited about music. Music was, the music thing was fun. It was, and it was people were passionate about it. They really were. Even the fans, even people like yourself, who in the beginning you even mentioned, like, you were just a fan of a lot of these people, right? And it's interesting now because I think there's still some of that going on, but I think a lot of people get buried in their phones. They get buried in technology, and that's all cool. But I would love to see us get, especially after something like COVID, that's why I'm doing this. I would love to see us get back to that level of excitement.
I think there's every reason and possibility for it to happen. Just to mention something that you brought up there is that, when a guy like my dad was either the host or the MC, that was a bigger part back then than it is now. Like, his name would be on the same playbill as the bands that were going to play. And that was a big deal back then. And the hosts back then had to work harder. Like, it was, if the show didn't get the 2,000 people, it was a failure.
Yeah.
But the host also had to be the friend of the band. And, you'd go to these shows, and when you were talking about Wonderland Gardens, my dad and Ronnie Hawkins were very good friends.
Oh, wow.
And through also guys like Nick Panasico, who was, London's promoter at the time and very involved with Kiss, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
I'm friends with Nick to this day. He's
really
one of the biggest supporters of local music in London. And it's just, it's amazing to see that the spark is still in there with those guys that remember those good days. But it's, I think, harder and harder to get people to love music that way. You just mentioned.
Why do you think that?
Well, you just answered it a minute ago. The phones. And when these
distractions.
It's all one big distraction,
right?
That and I'm guilty as charged too.
So am I.
I can't tell you that I haven't been to a concert, cracked out my phone. I don't usually film the stuff a whole lot, but I do like the odd picture. But it's really annoying to the musicians. And I've seen some stuff lately where a lot of the bands, even on stage, are pushing back and saying, please turn off your phones. Like, I saw John Cougar Mellencamp walk off stage the other day in a huff, and
I did see that.
They're up there just performing their craft and trying to be entertainers, and people can be so rude and disrespectful that bothers me more than anything.
When I was in, it happened to be the very first time when a comedian came to Bud Gardens. I won't remember who it was, but it'll come to me. But when I was in New York, I went to see Tony Hinchcliffe perform, and it was a smaller show. He's got 2 big sold-out shows now at MSG, but it was a smaller show at a hall there. I can't think of the name. But I went with a friend of mine. We went down together, and we got to the door, and they said, we're going to have to lock up your phone.
Yeah.
And that was his first time having that happen. Now, it happened to me, again, in London previously, but that was his first time. And he goes, what do you mean? Mm-hmm. Like, should I call my wife and, like, let her know that, that what's happening? Like, well, send her a text if you want, sure. But that's how physically connected that we are to these devices, that, oh my gosh, I'm going to be an hour with someone not being able to get a hold of me. But then, the show started and the show finished and we watched the whole show. And ironically, got talking to some locals that we didn't know. And it was a great experience. Watched the show, walked out, got our phones back. And he turns to me, he goes, I know now why he locked up our phones.
Totally.
He goes, he's straight down the center politically. He covers the whole spectrum. Mm-hmm. And there's no way he could do any of that in today's day and age if there was phones out. And
he's not doing a new show every night.
No.
So if all of a sudden his show goes up online, there's no reason to go see the show.
Right.
And
exactly.
they survive by touring like that. And I've had what you had happen once. And this year I went to see Bono speak in Toronto.
How was that?
It was a fantastic show, but they took my phone away, and everyone else is into like these locked zip bags,
Yep.
and it was on my mind the whole time. I mean, Bono is my favorite singer and artist of all time. U2's my favorite band. I got to go see them at the Sphere 3 times this year.
I saw your stuff. I know.
And I can understand why they do that. The Sphere was a different thing because I think they wanted people they even encouraged you to take out your phone, take pictures of that. It was a real viral experience.
Well, they were the first thing in there. So yeah, exactly. I think they wanted to promote it, right?
They did, and I actually was expecting that they might take the phones away, but it was quite the opposite. And as you may have seen, I did post some stuff, but
I was jealous.
Listen, I had a pretty amazing experience out there because I have a very good friend who I'll just keep quiet right now about.
It's all good.
That worked for U2 and had a very special relationship with U2.
Wow.
That invited me out, and we got the whole VIP treatment. And there was a backstage area, and there was a lot of fun stuff that most people never will have had an opportunity to experience. And I got to see the show from a few different areas that most people didn't get to see it from. And Actung Baby's my favorite album they've ever done. It's been the soundtrack of my life, and to see it in Vegas like that was to me pretty much the greatest musical experience I've ever had. Yeah,
that's pretty cool, man. U2 is my favorite band of all time too, and there's a bunch of different things of me talking about that, about why. It has to do with my dad and Western University. That being the first song he opened up his set with during a Frosh Week there, and during a soft Pump It Up event. But listening to U2, Where the Streets Have No Name, that he started with, was the beginning of me knowing that I had to support my dad and what he was doing. And so U2 holds a real special place in my heart, for sure. And I've gone and seen every tour since Pop Mart. Mm-hmm. Previous to that, I was a bit young, and they didn't obviously come to London, so I wasn't necessarily going to Toronto. But shout out to Jay Porter. Jay's works with Radio Prime Acoustic now, but was working for us at the time. And me and Jay went to see Pop Mart, and that was my first time seeing them live. And that was the first tour where they used LED wall.
I was at the opening night show for that tour in Las Vegas.
Oh, wow.
Backstage, got to experience it. And you know that on that tour, that after that first night on that tour, they just about broke up on the first night of that tour. They were so upset and frustrated. They didn't feel the album was ready. They hadn't had enough time to really rehearse the tour. There were technical issues. It was a bad situation. It was crazy. But like when you were saying The Streets Have No Name, that was the first show that I ever saw live with U2 was in Syracuse, New York, with Rain Maida.
Oh, yeah?
And we were both obsessive Joshua Tree fans. And I'll never to this day ever have the chills like I did with the opening tones of Where the Streets Have No Name. I mean, it can almost bring me to tears just talking about it, because those tones are everything to me.
Absolutely. I went as far, 100%. And I went as far as to actually tell the story about what I just mentioned there at my wedding. In my groom speech, I told the whole room that I love my parents, and that I that song meant a lot to me, and that it was and I said it because of my dad. It was in the room, and it just felt right at the time. I didn't write my groom speech. I just sort of said it, and so yeah. But I'm the same. During COVID, there was a lot of time spent with me watching all kinds of different videos, and I found some really interesting, cool videos of U2 and Bono and the guys collaborating with African artists and choirs and
the Rattle and Hum years.
Oh, wow. And just like that stuff is mind blowing. I don't even care if you're not a U2 fan. And, you know, in some of the videos, there's one video specifically where they go to a church in Harlem, and they got invited there. Someone did a cassette. Someone sent them a cassette. Edge goes on to explain it in the video. He says, you know, somebody sent a cassette and it got to us of this church choir doing Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For. And it got to them, and they were so moved. I'm getting chills. Yeah. They were so moved by it that they went there. The band showed up, and it was interesting because when you watch the video, all these people there, they weren't fanboying at all. They were barely even fazed by the band being there. It was interesting. And the band started in the video. The band starts, and Larry's just on a conga, you know, and it was very acoustic. And the band just starts, and Bono just kind of starts singing. And at one point, you know, after the first chorus and the second, he starts to get into the second verse. And then on the second round of the chorus, the choir took over. And he just, the whole band, like Bono first kind of stepped back, and then the whole band stepped back because the choir just took over. And no mics. It was just, you know, it was a traditional church that had real good reverberation, and these people could sing, man. And the band stopped and just went, whoa. And you could feel, even through the video, you could feel the energy in the room, and it was wild. And I sent that, I posted it online a bunch of places, and I sent it to a bunch of people that I thought it would help at the time, because there was a lot of people in some really weird, dark places during COVID that needed to be uplifted. And U2 always did that for me. And I agree with you. I think there was some weird energy on the Pop Mart thing. And not knowing any of what you just said, I could feel it back then. And I did find out later about some of the technical issues, because I had some friends who were in on the crew and stuff, and they were having major issues with those video walls. And it was all new technology, but it was too early. And but yeah, I agreed, and there were some really good hits off that album, but they're definitely, yeah, they weren't wrong. Like it definitely could have been better. It wasn't as polished as the few albums before that, for sure.
Well, what was crazy about that was that U2 took all of the money that they made from the Joshua Tree, and they invested it into Rattle and Hum, which features the scene that you just talked about.
Yeah.
Among many other things, like when they went to Graceland and were sitting in Elvis's cars and his motorcycle. And that's still a scene, like you just said. I have a hard time getting through watching that, because it was so emotional, yet in the end, that album and that movie actually hurt them for a little while, because what wound up happening was the US press started saying, who these guys think they are, coming over from Ireland and acting like they understand Southern blues and all of that. Yet so many people really took away something amazing from that situation and the Graceland thing, and just showing the backstage part of how hard it is for a band to be a band.
Yeah.
And people look up to these bands and don't realize that they're humans too. And it's hard enough as it is, touring, being away from your families, exploring new things. Like that's a part. I can watch that movie over and over.
I have it on VHS.
It's crazy, yeah. And I watched a movie when I went out to Las Vegas a few weeks ago to see one of the last shows at the Sphere. I watched the movie From the Sky Down, that was kind of like a little bit like Rattle and Hum, and they talked about the making of Rattle and Hum in it. And it really just it showed a side of them, like when they have writer's block. Wow, to think that U2 have writer's block. Well, they had it big time, and Achtung Baby came out of that, and which is why I think that's part of their celebration now. But you can literally see them in that movie writing the song One. And they captured it with Daniel Lanois and Brian Eno, and then you realize how much of a part of U2 those two guys were, and
Absolutely.
Steve Lillywhite and so many other people that were involved in U2's success weren't in the band, but it was a community for them.
Shout out to Daniel.
Oh, for sure.
I worked with him years ago.
I met him this year
when
he played at London Music Hall, and a couple friends of mine and I stayed behind for quite a while until he came out at the end. And to me, I'm as big of a fan of Daniel Lanois as I am Bono. And what was the coolest thing of all was at U2's final show at the Sphere, they brought him up on stage and he played one with them. And the only other person that I believe came up on stage during U2's run out there was Lady Gaga. Wow. So to bring Daniel Lanois out when you had guys like Paul McCartney and Dave Grohl and everybody were at the Sphere, to see them come out and pay homage to Daniel Lanois to me, he is the best producer ever.
Yeah, that's a big deal. You're not wrong. That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And he is a big deal. And he was a big deal for me. I mean, you're right. He definitely helped shape those years of music that ended up ultimately affecting parts of my life, big parts of my life, my whole life. I mean, who knows if that time when I was in grade 7, I think it was, if that song hadn't happened and my dad hadn't played it and I hadn't experienced, and I didn't really get into the details, but basically my dad was playing in a band called the Piranha Brothers. And if you can picture this, we're at Alumni Hall. It was Alumni Hall? Where was it? It was either Alumni Hall or it was the theater at the Althouse College building, which is now called Faculty of Education. But anyway, I think it was Alumni Hall. But we were there and we were doing a event for the Softs, right? And the Softs were going to do this Pump It Up event before they go out and, take all these frosh kids and drive them insane for a week. And my dad came out and those first tones, that's how he started, were those first tones. And now bear in mind, I hadn't heard the song before. And my dad, it was a budget gig and there was no lighting. And my dad, I was there with a friend from elementary school. And my dad said, hey, can you two guys just go back up there and run those follow spots? There's these old, archaic follow spots. Can you guys go and just run follow spot for the show? And I was like, sure. And so we did. And, again, not knowing what was going to happen. And, and Wester and the Piranha Brothers. And look, curtain open. And they were there. And we turned the follow spots on. And there was, and those tones started. And they nailed it. Like they nailed it. And the minute that big crescendo happened, the entire room was on its feet. The entire room, and not just on their feet. They were like leaping off their chairs. And right then and there, I knew. I was like, my dad's a rock star.
Yeah.
My dad is a rock star. This is the coolest thing that's ever happened to me at this point. And it was amazing. And so to me, had that song not happened, had Daniel not been involved with the band, who knows what would have happened in my life, right? So he's a legend, man. He is an absolute Canadian legend, and thank goodness for him.
Yeah.
For all what he's done for not only U2, but for people, all kinds of
Dylan, Emmylou Harris, Peter Gabriel.
Absolutely. Oh yeah, Gabriel. I mean, Gabriel's another huge part of my life. Huge part of my life.
Yeah.
I got to see him perform with Sting in Toronto, playing each other's songs.
Oh yeah.
Which is wild,
Yeah. Oh,
wild.
That's funny.
But I didn't I knew you were a U2 fan, but I didn't quite realize how big of a U2 fan.
Yes.
That's pretty cool. Yeah, I would have loved to have gone and seen the Sphere show. I mean, obviously I'm a lighting guy, and the technology that they're using there is unbelievable. But I just didn't get a chance to make it out there. So I was living through your videos and stuff. But yeah, that was the U2 stuff is incredible. Now you've worked, obviously, Rain and the guys from Our Lady Peace. In terms of what you did with bands, was it mostly just promoting shows? Was that your sort of, or did you help bands as well?
I helped bands in a few ways. There's some that I sort of helped maybe invest a little bit of money into demo tapes to help get them to the next level. Being a promoter in terms of booking shows, but I was also the one taking the risk on the shows too, where if it didn't sell or didn't do well, I was kind of on the hook for it too. It morphed into learning more about kind of the agency side of it, of finding venues for bands to go into,
Right.
helping them get set up and whatnot. I've just always been a big cheerleader for the Canadian bands, whether they be big or small. And, as I was mentioning that, aside from the rock side, when I was working with Donald in Montreal, with Barry Garber, he was Celine Dion's agent. And so that was another artist that I spent a lot of time with in many different cities in the world.
Really?
And got to see that side of the business,
Wow.
which was really amazing too. I spent time with them in Las Vegas, in Atlantic City, in France, and many different cities in Canada, but even Quebec, that once again, it was a family affair, and everybody worked together. So that's where I learned just that you can't be all things to everybody, but if you know enough about each one of them, you can always help guide bands. And I've been very generous with that, with my time and my passion to share that, because I'm probably my own worst enemy when it comes to generating revenue or making money off the bands. Even the guys in Our Lady Peace or Tea Party would tell you that right now, that I really do it for the right reasons. And the same thing even in my day job right now with radio, because I work with a lot of students that are in the Fanshawe program or whatever, that are excited to get into the radio business. And I know it's tough, and I know that with what you read in the papers and the media and everything, that people would think that there's not jobs and opportunities, but there really are. But you got to be passionate about it. You got to really want to do it. You got to volunteer. You've got to, do things to make yourself stand out, because I can't tell you how many people I've seen go from being the entry level promo rep to the promo director, to maybe being on air, to maybe getting into sales, maybe becoming the general manager of the radio station.
Absolutely.
I've seen so many great success stories, and I still believe, whether it be in music or in radio or whatever. I mean, there's a few artists here in London that I think are real rock stars that are up and coming right now. A couple of them you may have heard of, like John Fellner, or Lucy Morgan. These people that just play.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes, is you got to work your craft. You got to network. You got to, some days if it's pouring rain and you're on the corner of a street or whatever, just keep doing things that build your character and get you noticed and let people see your passion.
It truly, it's interesting, because I think, you talk about, you being your own worst enemy, but I don't think so. Like, I think I think there's people that would agree with you on that, looking at it from a monetary standpoint. But, if you look at some of the people who I'm sure, we both know that have profited off of this art that we call music. I mean, the art was there before the money, right? And to create really good music, sometimes you have to go through a lot, and it takes a village of passionate people to make that a reality, and to make it something that moves people. Like, look at the conversation we just had about you two.
Yeah,
I can't even imagine the amount of people that had to touch that art from all the way back to all the way, to where they are now. The amount of people that have gone in. I mean, when they were doing, I don't know which tour it was, but there was one tour that they did, I think it was Pop Mart, where they had, 200 plus personal crew traveling with the band, and 500 local crew, putting this thing up and down. I think it was, there was that one. And then when they did the one with the claw, that was a huge crew as well. That's just the live show.
Right.
Like, that's not the music. That's not the recording. That's not the writing. That's not the day-to-day with these guys. And all of what goes into promotion and, your world. And it's incredible. And to me, I think that there's a place for all of that. But I think we have, like you said, I think we have to do it for the right reasons.
Oh, for sure. For sure. And the bands are having to learn a new way of doing it too, because despite what people think, a lot of these bands that you think live wild and crazy lifestyles aren't living that life. The record sales aren't the way they used to be. Their cut of it isn't the way it used to be. The advances from the record companies aren't the same way. So they're all having to work a lot harder and compete in a world of new technology and new places where people get their content.
Yeah.
And I'm noticing with a lot of them, it's hard work. And a lot of the artists, are very insecure people, and they like being in studios where there aren't a lot of people around, but they have a new set of challenges that people don't or didn't have back then, and so that's why you're seeing a lot of bands touring more. Is because a lot of them are doing their own merch. A lot of them are selling tickets because they're not making the money from the record sales anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And how does that affect, like, going back to what you did originally? You were a promoter, but I mean, labels were still involved. I mean, you talked about how April Wine got signed by the guys at Donald K. Donald, and back then there was revenue from album sales, but like that's not really as much a thing anymore, which is where the whole 360 thing comes in. You talk about merch and all ticket sales and all that, but ticket prices have gone through the roof as a result, right?
Yeah. And expenses have gone up the roof too.
Absolutely.
With the price of gas, on those tour buses, and
we own one. Trust me, I know.
And don't think for a second they love that life on the tour bus either. So it's a real grind when you're out on the road for weeks or months or years or whatever, and you're not with your families. Like it is not the lifestyle that people think it is, and I think it's good. Not to change the subject, but it's kind of interesting because in the production world, the last couple of years, I've kind of gone in a new direction where I've been a local promoter here in London for art exhibits.
Yeah, right.
You're not dealing with the personalities anymore. I mean, I spent the last couple of years doing an exhibit about Vincent van Gogh.
Oh yeah,
here in London.
That, right?
Yeah.
There we go.
And that was a whole new thing for me, but it had all of the elements and ingredients of a concert in a lot of ways: the sound, the production, the visual, new technology, a new way of seeing art. But I wasn't dealing with an artist. I was dealing with somebody who's dead for hundreds of years.
Sure.
But now my current project I'm working on is an exhibit about Banksy, who is alive, but nobody knows who he is. But everybody knows who he is, and they want to learn more about what's going on in his mind. So it's just become a new way of I've shifted kind of what I'm doing. Kind of like a lot of the bands have had to shift. I've just had to learn new ways of putting on attractions that still satisfy all of the senses that people want in their entertainment. And this like almost kind of coming from the whole Zoo TV sort of thing, that these exhibits now with all of the look over here and check that out, that's what people want is the, to go see something for an hour or whatever and really do the whole suspension of disbelief where you just get totally immersed in this and you can experience things that you've never seen before. And that's kind of what I'm into. It doesn't always have to be a rock band anymore.
Yeah.
But people want value for their money. And some of these concerts are becoming so expensive that ticket buyers now have to go, okay, well, I've only got enough money to buy a ticket to go to one show this summer.
Yeah.
And that yet you see so many concerts popping up right now that with Van Gogh, for instance, during COVID, we were able to do that show because we had limitations on how many people could be in the room at the same time, and we were able to provide social distancing. where you can't at a rock concert really that well.
It's impossible, yeah.
So we got lucky to bring something new, and that's what has been so satisfying about it. I just announced another concert the other day, and I still love that, but I'm really into this new thing right now to take it to another level.
Yeah, it's really cool. I mean, when I first saw that happening, I was like, wow, that's different, because we hadn't seen that here in town before, right? Up to that point. And then there was one that happened after that too, that was Monet or something.
Yeah, I did that show too. It was the follow-up. We at the very end of the show had about 6 weeks, I think it was, where we wanted to just see if it was just a one-off thing with Van Gogh.
Sure.
And we extended the Van Gogh, but we were showing the Imagine Monet exhibit as well, and it wasn't a fluke. The second the Monet show moved people just the same way.
Wow. Yeah, that's really cool.
I think people wanted, though, with Van Gogh, they always really wanted to come to Van Gogh and learn more about him drinking absinthe. Why did he cut his ear off? His mental illness was a real attraction to the show. And I think people wanted to go there and figure out what was wrong with him. And that was a real draw to it. So it wasn't just about his paintings.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's kind of, like you say, it's an immersive experience. It's not just about the art itself. It's about the artists and the whole, everything attached to it too. Yeah, that's really cool. Going back into rock for a second, just because I know you just out of everything we've talked to, you'd be a great guy to ask this to, because you kind of came up with Rain, and you came up in a really, in my opinion, one of the best times in rock. I mean, there's been a bunch, but one of the best times in rock in my era, for sure, in the 90s. How do you think that, because rock has had it kind of hard for the last little while. But there's a lot of bands, man, right now. There's a lot of bands. I mean, we run a music store, Music City, Canada, and we sell a lot of guitars and drums to people. And you mentioned Fanshawe. There's an incredible amount of students at the Music Industry Arts program and all the different programs that happen at Fanshawe. And these people are watching this show, and they're all kind of doing the same thing that other generations have done for the last 50 years and gone, there's this dream of being a rock star. And I've talked to different people on the podcast so far about this, but I'd love to get your perspective on it, coming from all the things that you've done in all the areas you've done it, in radio and promotion and everything. Is, where do you see the path for people in, whether it's a rock band? Country's a bit different, right? Because country still has a big scene in the US and all that, but rock, pop specifically, like, what does that look like now versus the past? And what do you think that looks like going forward?
I just think the whole organic way of songwriting is so important now, and it's stripping it down, going back to basics, getting away from some of the technology. I mean, obviously when I say that, I mean, like, there's a lot of auto-tune, there's a lot of digital editing and things that go into it. But I think that the bands that are either coming up now, or a lot of bands that are getting back out on the road, they're coming back to play the nostalgia, and they're going back to their old influences. Sure. Because, there's no point in even mentioning names of bands that, are taking advantage of it or whatever. Sure. But there are bands that I think you're starting to see, and I'll use one in a complimentary way, like the Black Crowes or something like that. I mean, that they're coming back, they're settling their differences, and they're coming back with their guitars, and they're plugging back in, and they're playing music that makes people feel good. Sure. That I can listen to the radio, whether it be satellite radio or traditional radio, and hear a lot of music these days where, like, it almost scares me for you to ask me, like, who's your favorite band right now? Those types of things, because there isn't a whole lot of new stuff that I like. And when I watch a show like the other day, the Junos, like I don't know anybody out there.
My dad watched it and he put a thing up on Facebook and he said, "Is it just me, or is this not for me?
Yeah.
Like, is this not, you know?" And it's not that it wasn't good. I mean, it was highly produced. It was produced well. I had Jason Spanu on the podcast a few episodes ago. He just finished running tracks for it, and he does work with Nelly Furtado. But like, so some good people on it and stuff. And I mean, you know, Dome Productions, shout out to those guys. They do a great job putting it on TV. But yeah, it was. I didn't watch it. I was tied up that night. But yeah, he said it just, you know, and he's older, mind you. But yeah, he said it just wasn't for him.
It just felt to me forced.
Is that right?
It felt to me forced to really go overboard with showcasing every single culture in Canada. And that's okay. I mean, I'm a proud Canadian and love the diversity.
100%.
But you know, I thought Nelly Furtado was fantastic, actually, and I think all the performances were great. But I felt like there were a lot of you know, when you look at, you know, rock album of the year or rock band of the year, I'm looking at some of these names going, they're not rock bands. You know,
yeah.
they're not doing music the way that I like it. Maybe I'm not in the demographic anymore. I'm a 55-year-old guy, almost 55, and I just watch some of this stuff and I think, you know, that's why their numbers are going down a lot right now is I think that they're just trying too hard to represent every angle of Canada. Or maybe they need to come up with a whole new type of award show that celebrates that stuff too, because I just walked away with a bad taste in my mouth. I loved the talent. There wasn't one performance that I didn't like, but it was just the whole concept that I felt that they were almost trying to be like anti what the Junos used to be.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting time for sure in music, and I think that. But what I look at that's most important is that we had some incredible music that was made in the last 50 years. And when I ask younger people now, you know, who inspires you? Who are you into? They're still saying Jimi Hendrix. They're still saying all these names, right? AC/DC and Stevie Ray Vaughan and the Black Crowes and whoever it is. Doesn't, you know. But so that music is still extremely relevant. It's extremely moving. A lot of it's timeless. It's always going to partially inspire younger generations for decades and possibly even hopefully centuries to come, which is mind-blowing to think about. That all of this incredible music has really only been in the last, you know, 50 to 80 years, you know, 50 to 70 years. And in my grandparents' lifetime, literally, and they're still alive to this day. And so that's mind-blowing. You know, we have a long road of music to come. And for anyone to think that the rock category shouldn't be rock is not good.
I think it's back. I think rock is making a serious movement back right now.
I think it is too.
And you know, but to your point too, you know, I'm a big Robert Plant fan too. And you know, people are always harassing him about why he's not out there playing Led Zeppelin, putting the band back together, playing it at his shows and all that. And I've read interviews where he's said, you know, I'm not 18 anymore. I don't have that fire in my belly that I did when I was writing, you know, Whole Lotta Love or whatever.
It's a different time.
It definitely is. And these artists don't want to go out every night and just play the same old hits over and over. You know, every once in a while there's some nostalgia. I mean, I'm a massive Police and Sting fan. And from what I've heard, he couldn't stand the reunion tour. There was a little bit of nostalgia, but I think that after that tour was done, he was like, never again. You know, I wouldn't do this again. And I agree with him, but I also disagree with him because, you know, I got to see that live multiple times. My wife Natalie and I went and saw it in Vancouver on their opening night. We got to go to their dress rehearsal for the show.
Wow.
And being the first public to see them back together on stage is once again a musical memory that I'll have forever. But I understand why Sting, I mean, that guy just keeps touring like a machine. Every time I go see him, the next thing I know, he's announcing another tour.
I know.
And I keep going back for more.
I'm on his mailing list. I know. I see the same thing.
Yeah. Every time I shake my head, like, Sting, go enjoy your winery in Italy. I mean, because I want to come over there and randomly run into you someday and watch you play Fragile.
Did you go to see him act in Toronto?
I did.
Did you? I got to see that show too.
Yeah.
I thought he was phenomenal.
I thought he was really good. I mean, he's a real talent. I mean, he's an idol of mine. And I've seen some of the different unique things that he's done. I haven't seen his new one that's in Toronto right now, but he's not in it per se. Yeah, I feel, I mean, I did see him this year and it's kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to go to this next one yet. It's just, I'm a little stinged out, but I still listen to him a lot at home.
Yeah. It's funny because when just before we started, you pointed out the bass behind me, right?
Yeah.
It's the newer version of the bass he plays. And, I've grown up. My dad had bought a van when we were kids, and we used to go to Florida in it. He used to drive us to Florida. We used to go visit my grandparents down there for Christmas, and that solo album that he did with Fields of Gold on it and all that was great. He bought that CD right when he got that van, and so I mean we listened to that CD on repeat in the van. I got introduced to Sting through my dad, and then I mentioned to you earlier I went and saw him and Gabriel, do each other's songs, which was really cool. Yeah. I wasn't expecting it. I didn't quite realize before that was what it was going to be. So when it happened, I was like, oh wow, this is wild. But it was really well done. So that was a good show.
We saw him with Paul Simon do the same thing in Denver.
Really?
Yeah, my wife and I lived in Denver for a few years, and we got to see him do it with Paul Simon, and I got to see Sting literally front row at Red Rocks.
Oh wow!
And Red Rocks is to this day my favorite venue ever, and so seeing him there with his band was amazing too.
Yeah, that would be insane. Yeah, we did. We got Bungie working here he works with the Bare Naked Ladies, and the ladies played Red Rocks. And he sent me. Was wearing our London Guitars shirt. Oh, cool! And he sent me this photo. He texted me the photo of him standing there in the venue, right, no one in it, with the London Guitars shirt on. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. But yeah, that's a killer. That's a killer place to see anyone play.
My first show I ever saw there was Incubus. It was crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's
totally cool. So. I think I agree with you. I think the future is bright for rock, definitely. I think pop music will be what it will be, and people will find through technology now, which is incredible from the promotional standpoint, will find a way to get their music out there no matter what genre it is or whatever. I am encouraging people to listen to blues music again because I think that blues is dying over the last decade, sort of coming down because of the age demographic, right, is moving on. And my dad did Blues Fest in town for a few years there and tried to make a real go of it, but just couldn't get the ticket sales. But then when I talk to people, younger people, they're like, oh man, this art, and they start talking about some of the different artists. It's some of their biggest influences.
And almost all of them.
And so this is the thing, is like, man, we have to have a resurgence of some type of blues or blues rock. I mean, I just had Bill Durst on, which is, quintessential London blues rock with Thundermug. And so, I'm trying to get as much exposure around that as I can. My dad's got a show coming up that he's doing at Centennial Hall, still trying to do this sort of blues thing. And I would encourage, a lot of the people watching to to go back and listen to some of that early Our Lady Peace stuff, to listen to some of the blues stuff, to listen to some of the 80s and 70s, what we used to call classic rock. Now classic rock is the stuff from the 90s, and that mind blows me.
Well,
every time.
It's funny. Just last week, I think it was last week or the week before, Our Lady Peace were celebrating the 30th anniversary of Naveed. And I was very privileged that the band thanked me on the album cover and thanked my company in the album cover as well. And I went back and I listened to the whole album in its entirety for the first time in a long time. I listened to all their albums, but I just haven't sat back. And it just really reminded me of the days when I was in the studio with them while they were recording it, the energy, the passion, working with Arnold Lanny as a producer, and he taught them the ropes, and, they went on to kind of producing their own albums kind of. And it just the other day, as I said, I listened to it and I felt like I was 19 again. It was an amazing feeling, and it made me remember how they came out of nowhere, and they were passionate. They believed in themselves. They toured, back and forth across the country, and they earned their stripes. And look where they are now. They're headlining shows in Canada, but still opening for huge international bands. So it's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. That being said, would you say that passion and dedication to the craft, to the art, would you say that those are some of the quintessential things?
It has to be. It's got to start there. The whole fake it till you make it, and getting into studios with all of the, just the stuff you see on TV and online, and some of I hate to say it, but some of the rap artists and all of that, I think, have really dumbed down our industry. I love a lot of it, and a lot of it is just as important as the rock stuff is, but I think that some of the music out there and some of the subject matters and the lifestyles that they're using in their music, and the drugs and the excess and the way that a lot of the artists treat women and all of that is shameful. It's disrespectful. That I know everyone needs to have their own art and their own outlet, but I just feel that everyone needs to really give themselves a shake, strip it down, go back to basics, write better songs, and just go out there and have fun. Yeah. Like, that's the thing is, I've seen some artists that we both know that I don't think they're having fun anymore.
Right.
They're doing it because they have to pay their bills, and they're going back out on the road reluctantly with a chip on their shoulder. They're frustrated, and they're not enjoying it, and it's sad to see that.
Yeah, because it's not the intention, right? Mm-hmm. The intention of the songs and the music and the whole band originally was not that.
Yeah.
So for that to be what it is now, there's a part of that the people feel. Mm-hmm. Remember when I just told you earlier about U2, about Pop Art, mm-hmm. that I could feel something back then that I still feel now. Mm-hmm. That when you say that about the band and how they felt, mm-hmm. about how they almost broke up, like, I could feel that back then, and I carry that with me to this day. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you have to be careful about the energy you put into your live shows, because that energy is going out there, mm-hmm. and it's influencing people, whether they're conscious of it or not. I'm very in tune with that stuff, so I'm fairly conscious of some of that stuff. Like, when I meet people, I get a vibe, and I know, and I'm like, something's going on.
Something's weird. I mean, you know what? Like, as I said, I love Motley Crue. Do I love what they're doing on tour right now? It's a cash grab. Mm. And I get it. They all have bills to pay, and I think, but I don't think that what's going on backstage is what was going on years ago. No. I don't think that these guys are even really talking a whole lot with each other. I think they're just going out and doing shows, and their brand is pretty strong, but I'd rather stay at home and listen to Shout at the Devil in the original form when they were they were fighting it tooth and nail in Los Angeles, playing, those clubs and
Sure.
all of that there. That same with Guns N' Roses, right? Same thing. Like it's that now it's the business side,
Yeah.
and
Which I get. Like, I get that.
I get it too, and so do the fans, and that's why I don't think a lot of the fans really care if Motley Crue or Guns N' Roses put out new music anymore.
Right.
Yeah, they want to go hear the hits.
Yeah. Well, exactly. And that's what it is. Like, I've never seen Aerosmith before, and I had tickets to go see that show in Toronto that got canceled. And, I don't know if that show's ever going to happen.
Right.
But that's what I was going to hear. I was going to hear the hits.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a thing. The kind of energy that having the passion initially and grinding it out and creating your art, no matter what it is one thing, but keeping it going. I mean, for a band like U2, certainly Genesis, it was sad for me to see Phil Collins on that last tour sitting in a chair. Like, I couldn't go. And a lot of people said they went and it was great, but I remember Phil behind the kit, running around the stage in Detroit when I went to go see him in the Palace of Auburn Hills. I just, that's how I want to remember Phil, is with all that passion and energy, giving 100% as if it was the first day he walked out from the kit, which was actually here in town, which was the first time during Genesis years. My dad told me that about the first time Phil Collins ever came out from behind the kit and sung was here at the London Gardens.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I think there's something to be said about people really focusing on the passion and stuff. And it's funny you bring up hip hop music because, I've seen both sides of that coin. I've been keeping in contact recently with some more famous hip hop artists and the people connected to them. And that's an interesting scene for sure. It really is. And to stay relevant in that scene is also interesting too, because they're, again, riding on their hits, because that's a limited time offer too. A lot of times it's hard to stay relevant in that world because there is a lot of flash.
Yeah.
Right. And social media has allowed everyone to live that lifestyle now, at least virtually, as their virtual self.
Yeah.
There's people that do that. They'll go out and take selfies in front of cars that they don't own and
totally
all this stuff. Yeah. Right. And so now that culture, there's the fans have now become the artists in that sort of sense. Right. There's people now that I'm searching for the word, but there's people now that literally, all they do spend every single day filling Instagram or whatever platform with photos and trying to get as many followers as they can to try influencers, to try to become influencers. And now companies are contacting them just like they would traditionally in the pop hip hop years, right? And pay these people to put products in their videos or in whatever. Now the influencers are taking over.
Yeah.
So that's now another competitor to the hip hop world, right?
Oh, for sure.
And so that's a tough world, I would say right now.
I choose to look the other way and go watch a band like the Glorious Sons or someone like that. Like, I've seen them a couple times in the last couple of years. I don't know them and have never done anything with them. But I can tell they've got their groove on. They're writing good songs. They're doing the right things. I saw City in Color recently, and just, Dallas is just really captivates me. The singing and songwriting almost in a way like a Daniel Lanois, where just seeing that seriousness and but really sharing who they are and all of that. It's just there is so much great music out there. I hear new stuff every day that are bands that none of us will probably ever hear of, but it's really good, but I don't know how they're going to make it.
Well, that's a great segue. So I want to ask you, how do they make it now? Like, what does that look like? Like, because, you come from radio.
Yeah.
You're still in radio.
Yeah.
You were talking to me earlier about some of the creative team and stuff, people that traditionally in radio would find these acts and create like you said, there's people that back when you were working in the States that would be like, yeah, this company pays us $1 million. How do we take that $1 million and make it something for them? Well, you get Snoop Dogg. Well,
Yeah.
okay, but that's in one side of it. The other side of it is I look at a station like you mentioned, Taz and Jim, like you look at FM 96 and how do artists get on those stations? How do they get that airplay?
They
Like,
do it
what
the
is
way
that-
the way that the country music artists do it.
which is
They show up and they're present, and they because I work at Country 104 as well, and when one of these artists, whether they be Keith Urban or they be High Country or some of the great Canadian country music artists as well that tour, and they back and forth, they come to the radio stations early in the morning. They engage with the announcers on the station. They will do it in every city. They will come and they'll play. And these guys, they're not showing up hungover, and they don't come in with attitude and with their dark sunglasses on, kind of against their will or whatever. I find there to be a very different energy that comes out of the country music artists that come up to our radio stations. And it's amazing to see. And it's, to me, no secret why country music is really exploding. Even though it's not my thing and I don't love it a whole lot, I do like seeing country music artists play, because I really do believe that they take the songwriting process really serious. I know there's a lot of co-writing that goes on, that I have some great friends that live in Nashville and all they do are write hit songs for people. It happens in every industry or every genre of music as well.
Does nowadays.
Hip hop probably especially,
hip hop, dance music, everything.
But I find that you take somebody like Chantal Kreviasek, who is one of my favorite all-time Canadian female artists, that will do co-writing with someone like Drake or Kendrick Lamar or someone like that. And those are really amazing collaborations that happen. And so it's not really about the type of music, I think. It's just about getting passionate people together that are great singer-songwriters.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming out, I had Brad Gibb on. We talked on episode 4, and he did a great job of sort of explaining to people the sort of the process that programmers like him look for to get traction, really get traction. And I thought that was interesting, because I was genuinely myself curious about that, because I have had no idea. And I've managed a few artists, country, mind you, in the past. And I was always curious about that. How do you get on radio? How do you get radio play?
I mean, Brad Gibb's a perfect example, because, during his time as the program director of Country 104, it's no secret why there's so many, have been so many platinum records up on his walls in his office and stuff, because, the country music artists and the country music labels value their relationship with radio. Country music radio has been so important to it, and the country music artists, I think, respect radio more than a lot of the other genres do. They're much more accessible. They've always got a big smile on their face and willing to go the extra mile. Yeah. And so that's what I love about it, and that's why I grew up at a time when country music was talking about losing your wife, losing your house, losing your dog, whatever. But now the subject matter of the songs are a lot better. But I look at bands like Alabama or whatever very differently than I look at some of the new up and coming stuff. So, but it is great to see the fans go wild. I mean, when I see on social media when some of these bands come play Budweiser Gardens, and they are a country band that I've never heard of before, and they could do 6 nights and sell out Budweiser Gardens.
It's
the
wild.
Fans are rabid. It's crazy.
It is crazy, and I've been to a few of those shows at Bud and seen. Shout out to the boys from Luke Combs's band. They came here and did a clinic, and it was great. And we did a drum, and Matt, the bass player, came too, and we did a clinic here for a bunch of drummers. And that's just something that they do. Talk about showing up. I mean, there's something that like they don't have to do. They're on tour with Luke Combs.
Right.
Why do they have to show up at a music store in every city? It's because they want to. It's because that's their contribution, and way to give back and to create interest around what they're doing and to connect with people. I'm still connected with both guys on social media, and I think the stuff that they're doing is awesome, and the fact that they feel the need to connect with people like that is so cool. And it links in with what you were saying about the value of radio with country, because I think that new country specifically is specifically reaching that younger demographic because it's real, like because it's not about your dog died or your wife left you or whatever. Like there is some of that in there still to try to bridge the gap between the younger generation and the older generation. But it's about partying and having a good time, and they're trying to reach that younger audience. So as a result, they're talking about things that people relate to, which if you go back in the day was what rock did, right? I mean, that's what rock did. It was at the time was all stuff that was relevant to the movement at the time. Right. And so country's just doing that now with people in certain pockets, and London's a great pocket for that because we got a ton of country people around here because look, we're a major farming community. For sure. Right? So yeah, I mean, it totally makes sense. And I've had the pleasure of working with a good number of new country artists. I just had Darren Walters on the podcast from the Walters family, and Darren's worked with a super big number of new country artists and the older country artists. And they're just good people, man. They're good people writing good songs. Like you said, people in Nashville there's a million people in Nashville all there writing great songs, songs that are going into R&B, hip hop, dance, rock. I mean, I got a friend of mine, shout out to Rod. He's even doing, he's a dance music producer and has a company and a label doing dance music production. But he's working in Nashville now because the writers are there, the songs are there. Yeah. And Carilla Music is this company, and but at the end of the day, I think that the good songs that have good intentions and good positivity, they cut through, man. Like it goes back to what we were talking about U2 and Sting and all these people. The reason these people are decade after decade and legendary is because these are songs that are moving people. It's not a fake it. You said fake it till you make it. You can't. No. You don't end up with timeless hits that move people generation after generation, decade after decade. You don't end up with that by faking it. Right. And if you do have to collaborate, and there's tons of that happening, you're right. That's fine. That's all good, man. I mean, but I think that it's an interesting time. I really do. I'm hopeful that I'm optimistic that we're going to see some really great rock happening. We're seeing a lot of rock in the festivals now again. We're involved with Rock the Park here in town. We're seeing a lot of rock coming, and new and old. This is this year they've got Neil Young playing with Nickelback, right? With so there's all these there's some newer rock, some older rock. So I think rock is coming back, and it's exciting times for you and me both.
It is. No, I'm feeling great about where it's heading right now, and hearing new stuff all of the time. So it's coming back.
Live music. How do you think people break into doing more shows?
Well, it's tough because in cities like London, there's fewer and fewer venues to do it. So that's why in a lot of cases, we've had to kind of create new events and bring in stages and production and do pop-up shows. That doesn't necessarily help an artist that doesn't have a name out there. But coffee shops. When I was mentioning Lucy Morgan before,
Yeah.
I see her schedule. She's constantly playing, like at the Covent Garden Market or whatever, or at 100 Kellogg in the atrium or something like that. And I'm every time I see it, I'm like, you're doing everything right. She's paying for her own tour to go up into Northern Ontario and play places where bands would never go to.
Is she aware of that? Is she aware of the fact that she's doing everything right?
I don't think so sometimes. I think she is doing everything right, but I think there comes a point where with some of these artists of like, when am I going to get my big shot here? Right. And that's the toughest part for me, is watching the people that are really doing all the right things. And it's not even that they don't have the talent. The talent's there, all of the important elements I think that people think you need to have. I see a lot of artists that have it, but sometimes, they still need a mentor to come in and maybe work with them on their songwriting or pushing them a little bit harder. And that's where it's hard. It's also hard to get in and get studio time. And unless you're, a computer whiz with all of the software to record music and have all of that, it's still pretty tough. And it's not for everybody either, because I know a lot of people that have no problem writing great songs, but they're not great people either. And they're not driven. They're entitled. They're selfish. There's that side of the business too.
Sure.
That that isn't right either. So all of the stars have to align.
No doubt. And here's an interesting question that I'd love to ask you, because you've spent time in corporate radio and selling ads and getting. How do artists like her that are grinding it out, where's my shot? There's the other side of that coin, which is, years ago, there was a lot of corporations that would put money into artists. Mm-hmm. And in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinions, that's sort of started to vaporize back in the 90s. And how do we find, how do we get back to that? How do we get back to a time when there's people out there, I won't say corporations, but even just investors. How do we get back to a time when people want to invest in artists again? Because as you said earlier, filling up the tour bus, the cost of doing business has gone up, so therefore the cost of tickets has gone up. Everything's gone up. Mm-hmm. So was the cost of producing and releasing artists.
Yeah.
So unless your parents are multimillionaires,
yeah,
like what does that look like for you?
It's almost like a kid or a family trying to become a NHL hockey player. Right. I mean, the odds are really slim to none that you're really ever going to make it to that level. And so I think that managing expectations and really having a path to where you want to be and what your goals are, because, for instance, there's some great songwriters that don't like to tour. Mm. The anxiety of performing is like kryptonite to them, right? Mm. So it's very rare that I find people that are good at all of those things.
Sure.
And I know a young female artist in Toronto that Duncan Coots from Our Lady Peace and I and another friend started a little indie record label together.
Oh, okay.
And her name's Frankie White. And she had a band called Frankie White and the Dead Idols, and we helped finance the demo, and we shopped it around. We had her open up for Kiss, believe it or not,
wow,
at the Montreal Forum, or at the Bell Centre in Montreal. She had a few other shows. She opened for Bon Jovi, did lots of shows with Our Lady Peace and all of that, and she in the end chose to be a singer-songwriter, or like a songwriter, and has been doing great work for other artists, and being able to kind of talk to them about what her experience has been playing with big shows and stuff like that. And it's tough to watch sometimes because I see a lot of broken hearts and a lot of dreams that don't get fulfilled, and it's painful because I've seen a lot of them slip through the cracks that could have been, but I've also seen a whole bunch lately that I really believe in, that I think are going places.
Yeah.
And a lot of them are right here in London.
Wow.
I can tell you honestly, in the last year, I've had probably a dozen projects come across my desk that I'm like, I would bet everything on these guys, but you can't do it all.
No, yeah,
you can't. And I am a sucker for it sometimes, that I try and help everybody that I can. But I've also seen a couple of them that I just couldn't do anything with, wind up finding somebody that could do something with them. Amazing. And it's amazing to see. It really is.
I think, and I'm a parent. I've got a 5-year-old and a almost 1-year-old, and she's 9 months, going on 10 months. It's a different perspective, and I'm encouraging music every chance I get. We were just down in Florida, and I got my 5-year-old in this arm, and I got my 1-year-old in this arm, and I'm dancing around to Disco Inferno. Shouts out to Earl Young, from the Tramps, who's an incredible human being. I was every chance I get to encourage music with the girls, I do. I think encouragement as parents nowadays is super important. There's never been enough music in the schools. I mean, we can preach to that till the cows come home, but schools are a whole different subject that I won't get into. But I think parents need to take the reins on that. And as much as you're encouraging sports, as much as you're encouraging all the other things that your kids are doing, anything in the arts, music is a big part of that. It's a huge form of expression for these kids, especially when they're super young and don't really know the language that well. I watch my little one. She can't even speak yet. She says dada, which is awesome. But when I put music on, she expresses herself. Mm-hmm. And, shouts out to Eddie Gordon. Eddie was episode 5 on the podcast, and he talks about that, about how melody is the first thing that you hear, because you hear your mother humming to you. Yeah. And so parents out there need to really encourage it, because that goes back to what you were I'm tying this into what you just said. I think that the ones that slip through are the ones that don't get that encouragement, right? Mm-hmm. And some of them still make it, but they have to find their own way. I think as a parent, I'm really wanting to encourage my girls. I asked, Sophie tried piano, but she's a little young to focus on it. But I asked her, I said, do you want to try singing? And she's like, yes, I do. And so I'm actively looking for a singing coach for my 5-year-old. But she said to me, Daddy, if I do well with singing, can I go back to piano again? Mm-hmm. And I said, yeah, honey, absolutely, no problem. So I think encouraging young people to get into it, having, me and my wife are saving for them for school too. But so having school is super important, as all parents know. But there's a window. My dad always says there's a window of time, Ryan, that you have to do what you're passionate about. And that's the whole theme of this podcast episode is passion. Yeah. And it starts when you're born. You're born with it. Yeah. You are born into a world where you do not speak the language, no matter what country you're born in. Mm-hmm. But everything is new to you, and someone could show you, they could show you this glass, and my 1-year-old would be like, oh, mm-hmm. She's just passionate about everything. Yeah, and it's the negativity in the world that stifles that passion.
For sure,
right? So that's why I was saying earlier, I think we need to take a chapter out of your dad's book, may he rest in peace. He knew how to market it. He knew what it was all about. It was all about, like you said, the fun, the excitement, the passion. That was what it was about. And I listened to your dad for the first time today, and I could hear it. Mm-hmm. It was 60 years ago, but I could hear it. And I wish that was back. I wish that we could create now the energy that was being created back then. Yeah. Because I understand now why Bill said 2,000 people showed up the next day in Harris Park. Mm-hmm. I understand it now. Yeah. Because it was extremely exciting. and fun. And I would show up in Harris Park at that time, you know? So there's some work to be done for sure.
There is.
To get back to that. But I think we can do it.
Yeah.
I think we can get back there, and I think we're in an exciting time to be able to do it, because I think people are waking up to that too.
They are, for sure.
But anyways, thanks so much for coming on the podcast, EJ.
You got me re-inspired. I'm going to go try and find a venue and go see a live music act in London tonight.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Okay.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Everybody, thanks so much for tuning into Music City Live. I'll see you on the next episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for watching Music City Live. If you liked this episode, like the video. And for more clips and episodes, subscribe to the channel. Feel free to join the conversation by commenting below, and visit us at musiccityliveshow.com.